Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next webinar in CENTEGIX webinar series promoting positive school climate in tense times. My name is Mary Ford. I lead marketing for the company, and I have really, over the past year or so, appreciated being part of an organization that innovates technology to save and enrich lives. And our crisis alert solution now protects over 1 million people in over 1 million locations across the country. Our webinar series today, I'm just going to start off with a few housekeeping tips. I think that we've all been on so many webinars here over the past few months that we're probably familiar with the routine that I have everyone on mute just so that we can best manage the audio. And I am available to you via the chat. If you just need to ask a question or want to raise your hand, that's a way that you can get in touch with me. I want to let you all know that we've had some really great feedback about the webinars we've had over the past month or so. And the recordings for those are available on our website, centegix.com/events, and you'll see links to the recordings there if you'd like to go back. We are about to announce in the next week or so the webinar that we will have in December. It's going to be a really interesting story about a superintendent who has been using technology to improve and promote positive culture within his school district. So I look forward to being able to announce that one to you here shortly. So today I'm so pleased to have with us Mike Johnson. Mike is the Managing Director of ClearpathEPM, and their mission is to keep people safe, healthy, and to make the world a better place. I love that, Mike. I had to say that. The company provides safety, security, and emergency preparedness technology, consulting and training solutions to institutions, corporations, event organizers, and planners. Mike is extremely qualified to be here with us today. He's a certified protection professional as awarded by ACES International. He serves on the board of directors of Winterfest, Inc. and is the chair of the advisory board for the Center for Mass Violence Response Studies and is an advisor to the National Police Foundation's Averted School Violence. Mike, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mary. It's a real pleasure, and I thank you and the leadership team at CENTEGIX for what you do, for your outstanding product and service, and it's a pleasure to be here and share a little bit of knowledge and wisdom today.
Wonderful. Mike, I've really appreciated getting to know you here over the past few weeks as we've been getting ready for the session today. And I know that you have a really interesting story to your background as to how you became a school safety and security expert. So I gave our audience just a few highlights of what your current credentials are, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your background.
Okay, sure, no problem. So I spent 28 years in the service of the United States government in law enforcement and security, and retired about 10 years ago. I have to say I started very, very young in my career, and part of that 18 years of that service was overseas with the U.S. Department of State Diplomatic Security Service, and of course U.S. embassies, security at U.S. embassies, and we do a lot of work with schools overseas, which is how I met my wife, who was a longtime international school principal, 3 different international schools, and so just naturally working at the embassy, and then because my wife was at the school, I took great care and interest in all those schools, and so then it naturally, when I retired, when I came into the private sector, was involved in the risk consulting side of things, helping companies and organizations prepare to deal with whatever disruptions may occur. Then naturally I went into the school safety business, and since that time, 10 years, I've trained hundreds and hundreds of school leaders around the world on school safety, security, emergency preparedness, and you know, really it's become a real passion of mine, and to help schools be safe. I think that's some of the most vulnerable that we have in the world, and I think we have to do everything we can to keep those keep our students safe.
Absolutely. Mike, one of the things that I have heard frequently around CENTEGIX is this phrase, left of boom. and just trying to get to that here, getting left of boom. And I've come to understand that that's actually part of your curriculum, part of your methodology. Can you tell us a little bit more about what
Sure.
this means, and why is it important to a school to understand where they are on the left of boom?
Well, first off, I'll tell the those in attendance that we're not talking about boom as in a bomb. Okay. This actually the term goes back to when I was with the government, and I was doing a lot of work with the Department of Defense, and we were involved in tracking down improvised explosive devices in the Middle East that were killing our soldiers and sailors. And so my organization was involved in disrupting the supply chain of those components to make bombs. And I'll never forget, one day I was up at the Pentagon, and a high-ranking general made a comment to me. He said, we're spending billions of dollars to build these anti-personnel, machines and, bomb-proof sedans and all this kind of stuff, but you're getting us left of boom. And so when you think about that, if you have boom in the sense that they were talking about was an actual bomb, getting left of it on a line would be, okay, that's how you disrupt. And so when I started doing all this training with schools, then it said, you know what, I like that terminology for schools. And so you think about, but I look at boom as any disruptive event or potentially unpleasant event that could happen at a school, and there could be many. And so what we want to do is we want to get schools left of that, and we'll explain a little bit, but that's kind of that's the origins of left of boom. And of course, this is our part of our marketing team, come up with this really cool little logo. So
got it. So thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. And I know that you were part of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas task force. So can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and how getting left of boom plays into the findings from that study?
Yeah, happy to. So I was on the Broward County's MSD task force, which was assembled by the county commission. And there were, as you probably the listeners know, there were several different commissions and task forces, but we were hired by the Broward County to do the and I was brought on the task force as the school safety and security preparedness expert. And so, sadly, I got to see a lot of the details about what led up to and before and after and during this very tragic event. And on the other side is I got to meet a lot of these parents and people who survived and lost loved ones. And again, not that I needed motivation, but that gave me a tremendous motivation that what, we're doing the right thing, and we have to do everything we can to protect our students. So a lot of what came out of that MSD, those findings, has really helped refine and drive what we do today from a planning and preparedness standpoint. And sort of getting back to the left of boom, here's an example of this is the typical, if you will say, what I have seen, a typical school or even any organization. They sort of fall into this approach where it will never happen here. And I'll take MSD as an example. So, those that don't know, Parkland, Florida is a real sleepy little part of Broward County. It's not far from where I live here in Fort Lauderdale. And it's 25 minutes or so away, and it's a very nice manicured homes and really a beautiful part of the county, and very affluent. And MSD, 4,000, 4,500 students, and Parkland itself, the little city, had just been named the safest city in Florida just 2 days before Valentine's Day of 2018. Safest city, and was I think the 15th safest city in the United States. And so I think there was a sense of complacency in the sense that it will never happen here in this sleepy little village. And what happened then when it did happen there, then they're reacting. And they're simply reacting to the unpleasant events as they're unfolding. And if you think about any attendees that have ever done any sports or any athletics, you think about what you're always wanting to do if you're playing soccer or football or self-defense, whatever. You want to be sort of on your toes or leaning forward, which means you're prepared for the ball or a punch or whatever's going to come. And if you're on your heels, then that's a reacting. And what's going to happen is you're probably going to fall down or miss the ball or whatever. So I use that as an analogy for if schools haven't been trained properly and prepared, they're going to be reacting. And certainly what we saw with MSD, it was a total reaction. and you don't want to be in that situation because you're unprepared. And then what happens is undesirable consequences and outcomes. And literally, we lost 17 people that day were murdered, and 17 shot, and probably lives are forever changed. And so that's why I'm a real passionate advocate for getting left of boom, because I don't want to see schools being complacent like it'll never happen here.
Yeah, it must quite a shock to go from the town that is one of the safest places in the country to having then, so soon after that, one of the most tragic events in the school system.
Exactly.
Just trying to get to our next thing here. So I know that there are a whole lot more other sort of things that you encourage people to do to get left of boom, and then as they're experiencing that incident. Can you say a little bit more about those?
Sure. So basically what we've developed is this methodology, if you will, and looking at a lot of experience at events like this, and studying school events around the world where there's been disruptions. And so really getting left of boom is adopting this philosophy of one, first and foremost, all schools have to identify what their potential threats, hazards, and disruptions are. And this would be your, obviously natural disaster, insider threats. And you think about, we know this from the Averted School Violence Program, 80 to 90% of all attacks in schools are insiders. And by insiders, I mean either a current or former student or current or former teacher or employee. And so every school is going to have that threat. I mean, there's no school in the world, I work with schools all over the world, that I could say unconditionally, you're never going to have any type of insider threat. So that's for sure one of your first things. Every school should identify that as a potential threat. And then you go through your list of things that could disrupt your school operations. Identifying your assets is another big key of this. Is like, you need to know, where your students are, who they are, where they, and back to MSD, for instance, building 12, which is where the attack took place, that was the freshman building. And you think about it in the context of a high school where you have 9 to 12, the freshmen are there. They're the youngest. They haven't had that sort of they're not veterans yet in terms of school operations and things. They probably haven't been through many drills, and so maybe the suspect targeted that building for a reason. But certainly, I look at it from the standpoint of the way that school is laid out. I would not put my freshmen nearest to the point of entry to the school, for the very reason that they're probably, one of my assets that doesn't have that level of sophistication or preparedness that maybe a senior or a junior might have just in life. So identifying your assets is one of the key things. And then, of course, what we're talking about are vulnerabilities, and schools have to identify their vulnerabilities, and then from there you have to mitigate, and we'll talk in a later slide about sort of why that's so important. And then one of the biggest things is this constant sense that you have to have situational awareness, and that's detecting threats. And one of the things that I love about crisis alert, it opens this up for schools to have this sort of situational awareness. If something's going on, boom, the teacher initiates the crisis alert button, and then the cavalry is going to come. And so schools have to have a means of constant situational awareness so that they can detect threats and determine how to respond to various things. And then ultimately, it comes down to the planning and preparing for emergencies. And we always plan for however you're going to respond to an event as part of your preparedness, but you're also going to plan for how you recover from an event. And then lastly, kind of in the left of boom, is planning for emergency communication. And when I'm speaking of communication, I'm talking about not only obviously what is said and how it's said, sort of your communication protocols, but just the technology side. From is it a radio announcer? Is it strobes? And you need a combination of all of that. And again, kudos to your tech team for designing this program. That's what you need. You need this robust emergency communication that is not left up to one single source, because that's going to be a failure. And so once schools sort of adopted this left of boom philosophy, then when boom happens, they're responding. They're on their toes. They're leaning forward. Everybody knows how to respond and how to deal with that situation. And they're maintaining throughout this they're maintaining that situational awareness. Everybody knows what's happening. The leaders are able to make decisions because they have the flow of information coming in. And then again, you have to have, in the middle of boom, you have to have this reliable and redundant communication. And that's oftentimes, that's the biggest point of failure. And then of course, once you've done that, then you're into your recovering phase, and then that gets into the maintaining business and academic continuity. And we're certainly seeing a lot of this with the pandemic, with COVID-19. Schools are having to basically on the fly do this, build up this very robust business and academic continuity, because nobody was prepared for a pandemic of this magnitude. So going forward, schools who adopt the left of boom strategy with the pandemic, they're certainly going to be prepared for how to respond to and recover from a pandemic.
Absolutely. And Mike, as you were going through those points, the part about detecting threats and that situational awareness, it's my understanding that one of the outcomes of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas task force was that recommendation that anybody be able to indicate that there's a campus-wide threat.
Yes.
And so,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so when I think about the value that we communicate to school districts about the accessibility of our badge and making sure that everybody is equipped and really that everybody is empowered to help protect the school, I think is another really important element, and ties back to that situational awareness, because teachers and staff are all across a campus and they need to be empowered. It's not just going to be that one person in the front office that is able to know everything that's happening.
And a little bit on background for that. So Lori and Elon Aladef, their daughter Alyssa was the first one killed at MSD. She was 14 and she was shot 10 times. And I know Lori and Elon very well. I served on their board, Make Our School Safe, for a period of time. And that was, Alyssa's law came out of that because of the passion of these families losing family members. And Lori is the first to admit in this situation that those alerting devices would not have saved Alyssa, because she was, that's a lot of other left of boom things, but certainly we would have saved, a good portion of those 17 would not have died had we had some type of robust alerting tool. And so absolutely.
Right. Well, Mike, we promised the audience that we would get to the 7 keys for creating a safe school community. So I do want to give you a few minutes to talk about those.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the number 7 is I like the number 7 for a lot of different reasons. But when I developed this emergency planning management and our totality product, of course, I had to come up with 7 components. And so you'll see here that it's spinning, and hopefully nobody gets dizzy from watching this. But the idea is that it's constant. And what I see a lot is schools will, maybe at the beginning of the year, they'll do an assessment or a risk assessment, and then they don't do it, then that's done. So what I try to really teach and strongly encourage is that reminding schools that this is a constant process. And so, just like we had with our left of boom, no surprise here that we start with assessment, and not assessment in the sense of your educators here on the webinar, not assessment in your traditional sense. This is an assessment of your threats, hazards, vulnerabilities, and assets. And so from there you move into the mitigation phase, which is mitigating your vulnerabilities once they've been identified. And then we go into preparing and the preparedness aspect, and that's literally your training and drilling. How is a student going to respond, or how's a teacher going to respond? Where are you going to take those pre-K kids during the middle of a lockdown? So that's a constant process. And of course, alerting is a huge part of everything we do, because if you don't have the ability to, if there's a tornado coming and the kids are on the soccer pitch, and you have to have a means of knowing the tornado is coming, which is the alerting piece. And then you have to have the secondary, which is how to get everybody in a reverse evacuation back into the building. So that's the alerting piece. And the communication, of course, we talked about that, the importance of both the what you say and how you say it is so critical. And then what we want is schools to respond, again, thinking about on your toes, being from a position of preparedness versus a position of reacting. And then finally, what we want is recovery, because the recovery process, and we saw, unfortunately, it was another big failure with MSD, was they just didn't have a plan on how to handle the recovery prospect or the aspect, and so that created many more traumatic situations and everything. So yeah, so that's the 7 components that we promised, and everybody's gonna be like, wait a minute, that's it? But if you think about this, and if you look at my website, you'll see more about this. But the idea is that if you practice these 7 components and have the tools in place, it's going to lead you to have a very, very safe school community. And when you deal with a disruption, you're going to be able to do so from a preparedness standpoint.
And so, Mike, can we talk about that response element here for another minute? So at CENTEGIX, we strongly believe that every second matters, and that the sooner help can get to the person who needs it, to the right place, the right person, the better outcome an incident or a situation will have. I'd love your thoughts about that.
So yeah, I mean it's a great point. So you think about when I train everything that I do in my training, both in my live training and on my online courses, everything's built around the concept of a school response team, or I call them campus resiliency team. Emergency response, it doesn't matter what the school calls them, but the idea is that I tell schools all over the world, it doesn't really matter where you are, that you have 3 to 5 minutes on average that the school has to be kind of hold the fort down until the emergency first responders get there and take over the scene. So everything we do in school preparedness is based on that 3 to 5 minutes. And now that may vary because if you're, say for instance, you're in a rural school district, and fire or police response is 20 minutes away, now you've put a burden on your school campus response team of trying to hold the fort for that 15 or 20 minute period. So absolutely. And so you think about, that's all about life safety. And so back to your, every second counts, it's like that's exactly right. I mean, we literally that saves lives. And so the faster that you can get, in the case of an active assailant, the faster you can get all your stakeholders into a position of safety, then that's certainly going to mitigate any potential damage or loss of life. And so, yes, absolutely, every second matters, and that's you can't stress that enough about having and I mentioned this before about reliable communications, and unfortunately there's a lot of different products out there, and I'm not going to advocate which ones are one versus the other, but you need a product, a response alerting communication product that is as reliable as you can get it, and you want to approach 100% reliability, and unfortunately a lot of products can't get that for technological reasons, but
and the reliability part, can you say a little bit more about that? Is it that it's accessible, or that the network's up? Like, what are the elements of reliability that are important to you?
Well, I know my own Totality platform, we have an app, and I tell clients all the time that it has to be based on redundancy, that if you're relying on an app, for instance, like my own, by the nature of apps, particularly in a disruptive environment, you may lose your cell coverage, you may lose your Wi-Fi, and so and someone may be in a bathroom where you don't get good coverage, so you just don't have that sense of reliability that you have with for instance, like with yours, with the mesh net, which is so comprehensive that everybody's covered, and that's what I'm talking about, that if you're going to use a product that is totally app based, then you just have to recognize you need a secondary or a redundant system to make sure that everybody gets notified. Is that?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm a big advocate, obviously, of crisis alert, because I've seen what your product does, and it's that 100% reliability that I want all schools to have.
Right, and I just wanted to interject here. One of the things that we have recently done with our crisis alert solution is to enhance it so that districts that maybe they have an app now, but they want to add on the accessibility of the badge, and they understand how important it is to have that quick, easy access for people to initiate an alert. We're now able to work with districts across their broad spectrum of where they are technology-wise. Of course, all the way up to those that want to install the full solution so they have that reliability and that redundancy that you mentioned.
That's great.
So Mike, 7 keys, that's great. And I know that you also do some risk assessment for schools. So if we could talk about that.
So yes, and we've done risk assessments, and they're what we call boots on the ground, and we go in and we look at everything at school, everything from cafeteria sanitary conditions to all your typical drills and all those types of things. But so you think about in this Venn diagram, how do you determine risk? Risk is determined based on where the 3 factors come together. Assets, which we talked about, assessment of assets, and that's your freshmen, pre-K kids, teachers, IT, your student records, everything you have. And then your disruptive events, that's your threats, hazards, that's your active assailants, your suicides, your bullying, everything that could be disruptive in a school. That's 2 of the factors, and the third is vulnerabilities. And so where those kind of come together is how we create risk. Now keep in mind that assets are pretty much fixed, so they're going to be constant, okay? And the same with your threats and hazards and disruptions. That's a constant. I use the analogy all the time. If say you're a school in a high crime area, and that it's your critical threat is crime, and around the school, you're not going to get rid of that crime. The police may come in and try to take, but basically, unless you move the school or do something totally drastic, that's a constant. So likewise, we can't get rid of earthquakes, we can't get rid of hurricanes or tornadoes. So assets and disruptive events are constant. So the only way to lower risk is through the identification and mitigation of vulnerabilities. And so that runs the whole gamut of things. That's not only your physical security and technical security solutions that are what you don't or don't have, but it's also how much are you drilling and training, how prepared are your stakeholders. And so all of these are vulnerabilities. How good or bad is your communication, is your alerting process. So the only way a school can really lower risk is through addressing their vulnerabilities, and really the only way to address vulnerabilities is through mitigation. You think about with vulnerabilities, I use the word team, TEAM. You can transfer it, you can eliminate it, you can accept it, or you can mitigate it. And transfer is typically insurance, tough to eliminate risk just by the nature of risk. And you can accept it, which a lot of schools do, not even realizing they're just accepting the risk of an active assailant because they're not prepared for it, and they've accepted it with or without knowledge. And so what I put my emphasis on is the mitigation through procedures, through technology, through physical security, through all the components that make up a safe school.
Okay, so I think that acronym TEAM is something that we could apply to risk in so many different aspects of our lives, right? Beyond just school safety. So thank you. That'll be a key takeaway for me, TEAM.
Great.
So Mike, we've had, let's see, I'm looking at our little chat box here. We've had a couple of questions that have come in that I think we can address before we wrap up here. And one is that, okay, so 7 elements, that's a lot to try and think about and plan around. If you could pick one that was the most important, which of those 7 elements, I'm gonna go back to those, would be the most important one for a district to focus on first if they had to pick?
Absolutely, communication. And so I use the analogy in my courses that, let's just take MSD, that they had no really emergency communication whatsoever for a lot of different reasons, but they just really didn't. Now, they weren't prepared, they hadn't trained, they hadn't drilled for active assailant that year. All the teachers had gotten was a 45-minute PowerPoint, which was really substandard. So they really didn't know what they were supposed to do when faced with an active assailant. But here's the thing: had we had any type of robust communication, strobes, alerting tool, anything robust in communication nature, even if they hadn't been trained or prepared, natural instincts, they would have been reacting, but they would have been reacting, and it's the fight or flight, and they would have been running. And those kids on the 3rd floor would have been locked in their classroom like the kids on the 2nd floor were, because they heard the gunshots. third floor did not. So I would always start with that communication alerting piece, because the preparedness, absolutely critical, but we can talk someone through how to respond to an event if we have the communication. And if we don't, then all is lost. Likewise, you can have a robust preparedness and training, but if you don't have the ability to communicate either from a standpoint of situational awareness or just communicate what to do, then you're gonna lose lives or lose assets. And so I always place communication, how you say it, what you say, and how that is done is probably one of the most critical components, if not the most critical component of the 7.
Got it. And for our crisis alert solution, that is something that we really emphasize as one of our differentiators. It's the ability to communicate to anybody on the campus. And we do that in a full audio and visual notification. So our strobes go off, there's the intercom integration, and there's a desktop takeover as well. So really, nobody has to particularly have an app or be in a specific place on campus. As long as they can hear and can see, they will get directions as to what's going on and what they should do.
Well, you think about what I said about redundancy, and that's how do you build redundancy? You build it through having a tie-in with technology and across a wide range of solutions. And so, yeah, I mean, I've worked with live events, and the challenge with live events is because musicians can't, if they can't hear an app, or so you want to tie in 2 strobes, behind the stage where a big light is going off. And so it's that type of stuff that you absolutely need, because you want to be able to tap into all your senses. And while you may not hear something because others going on, but your eyes may catch that strobe, flashing red or whatever it's flashing, which indicates, based on your prior planning and preparedness and training, what that means. And so, yeah, I love that aspect of it.
Great, excellent. Well, we actually are at the end of our time here. That went by really fast, Mike. I appreciated all of your insights. Is there anything else that you would like to say in conclusion, or to help wrap us up?
No, I'm sorry I blah blah blah, but as I think people know, that I'm very passionate about this about the subject of keeping our kids safe, and our teachers and everybody else. And so I mean, this is great, and I really appreciate the opportunity for CENTEGIX to share this information. And I always look at it as our goal is to share knowledge and wisdom. I don't want to spread fear, and if through knowledge and wisdom we can keep our schools safe. And I really appreciate the fact that CENTEGIX is and your leadership team is you're leading the way on a very impressive product and services. And Mary, thank you for your time. It's been the last year or so I've been working with you since you've been there. It's been a pleasure, work with you. And this was great. This was an awesome experience. Thank you.
Great, Mike. Thank you so much. And to our audience, we are thankful that you joined us today. And there will be a recording available of this session if you would like to share it with your colleagues. And stay tuned for our next event that will happen beginning of December. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And thanks again, Mike. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Stay safe. Peace out.